So I'm wearing my glasses today because today we are talking languages. I spent about a month to a month and a half learning Vietnamese, albeit very inconsistently, and I've forgotten how difficult it is to start learning a new language. That's why I wanted to film today's video, which is going to be a little bit about my struggles and mistakes that I've made over the course of learning the 3 to 4 languages that I've learned besides my native language, which is English. I hope this strikes a chord with any of you who are studying a language right now and are struggling with it like I am, or those of you who want to get started with learning a language and need some mental preparation before you do. And I'm sharing these tips not because I'm trying to discourage you to get started on your language learning journey, but just because I hope they will help you better structure your learning and overcome any challenges that you face along the way. Without further ado, let's get right to it. So let's start out with something that can really deter anyone from even starting to learn a language, and that is doubting your abilities to learn a language in the first place. A lot of us have very limiting beliefs about our abilities to learn a foreign language, and this used to be me at a point in time as well. I learned Mandarin Chinese in school for about 10 to 12 years, and even now I wouldn't say that I'm very comfortable speaking, reading, or writing in it. Because of this, before I learned my third language, which is Spanish, I always just assumed I had no talent or knack for learning languages. I had also heard that adults are a lot poorer equipped compared to children to learn foreign languages, so I was just resigned to the fact that I would never learn a language to a fluent level. It was only after I decided to learn Spanish in college, which I became conversationally very comfortable in after only 1 to 1.5 years, that I realized that all these limiting beliefs aren't true. Ultimately, language learning is simply a skill. As long as you put time, effort, and practice into honing that skill, you will become better at it. Also, I came to learn that adults are actually just as good as, in fact, sometimes even better than children at learning languages. For example, in one published scientific study, researchers taught a made-up language to separate groups of adults and children in 2 different ways, and at the end of the study, it was found that the adults demonstrated more knowledge of that made-up language compared to the children, regardless of how they were taught and the method that they used to learn. Basically, what this study shows us, along with many other similar ones, is that adults are very capable of learning languages because they have a better idea of how languages work, have more mature cognitive abilities, and also have better study skills in general. Letting go of those limiting beliefs about my abilities and starting to trust myself more was crucial for me to kickstart my language learning journey. Language learning is already so difficult in and of itself, so you need to have confidence in yourself to overcome any of the challenges and bouts of demotivation that you experience along the way. Struggle number 2 is trying to force a square peg into a round hole. In other words, just following what everyone else is doing to learn a language. One of the things that makes language learning so tricky is that there is no one-size-fits-all solution. Even though there are many fundamentals of learning a language, such as having comprehensible input, learning grammar, learning vocabulary, exactly how you choose to learn these fundamentals is essentially up to you to figure out. For example, David James invented the gold list method of learning vocabulary by just writing it down. Luca Lamperiello swears by his double translation method. Many people, including Ikena and Matt from Matt vs. Japan, love to learn using Anki, which is a flashcard app. It's up to you to decide whether you want to incorporate all of these things into learning your target language or none of them at all. Following other people's method of learning is completely fine at the start whilst you're still trying to figure out what works the best for you. But you should take the time to tweak your language learning strategy if those methods do not work for you. That's why so many polyglots prefer self-studying over taking classes. It's because they are better able to structure their lessons according to how they want to learn the language. But also remember that this is very dependent on what type of learner you are. If you are someone who needs language learning classes to keep you structured, organized, and accountable, that's also completely fine as well. If you're not sure whether you want to self-study a language or take language classes, you can just try studying the language on your own for a couple of weeks. And if that's not working for you and you want someone there to motivate you more and hold your hand through the process, you can take a couple of classes on italki to figure out if language classes are for you instead. I'll link a video by Steve Kaufman on the pros and cons of going to a language school down in the description below. So take the time to experiment with all these different methods and don't get discouraged if something that worked for someone else doesn't work for you. Also, be aware that the methods that work for you might also change depending on the type of language that you're learning or the circumstances under which you're learning it. For example, when I was learning Japanese, I used Anki, which is a flashcard app, a lot to learn vocabulary. But when I was learning Spanish, I didn't use flashcards at all, and rather I learned most of my vocabulary just by following a textbook and using the words a lot in my conversations with native speakers. Also, I took Mandarin classes for nearly half of my life and I still don't feel comfortable using the language. But I took Spanish classes in college and they really helped me to structure my learning and get better at the language a lot faster. If you're a beginner in learning a language, I'm sorry, I know I threw a lot at you, but you just need to focus on two things. First of all, getting a textbook, just one resource that you can focus on, and secondly, immersing yourself in the language as much as possible through things like music, through books, through videos, and podcasts, etc., etc. From there, you can add extra tools if you think they are necessary or if you want to work on specific skills like reading or speaking or listening or writing. For example, if you want to work on your speaking skills, you can find a language exchange partner and meet up with them once or twice a week. Struggle number 3 is when your real-world application of the language falls flat. So you've learned quite a bit and now you're ready to put all the knowledge that you've learned to the test in the real world. So you go out there, you start speaking to native speakers, but you don't really understand them because of their accent or because they're speaking too fast. Or even worse, you understand them, but they don't understand you. Trust me, I've been there. I know how embarrassing it can feel when you are trying your best to communicate with someone, but they don't get you, either because you are stumbling over your words or because you just don't have the right pronunciation or accent. So here are some of my suggestions on how you can work on this. Firstly, if you don't understand what native speakers are trying to say, try to consume more content in your target language that are made for native speakers. For example, news channels, YouTube channels, podcasts. These sources will help you get used to how the language sounds when it's being used by a native speaker. At the beginning stages of language learning, it can make sense for you to start with easier sources of content such as kids shows or language learning materials where people speak a lot slower. But if you want to get used to how the language sounds in real life, then you need to consume content made for actual speakers of the language. You don't have to worry about understanding everything that is being said. Just let the words wash over you, and as you learn more, you will start to understand the meaning of the things that you're listening to. Secondly, I would highly suggest doing a language exchange with a partner who wants to learn your native language. This way, it feels a little bit more balanced. You won't feel as bad asking them for help because you will be giving help to them in exchange. And also, since they want to practice English with you, presumably their English isn't the best and they will be using their native language more to communicate with you, which is good because that means you have more time to practice in your target language. Doing this will allow you to practice your pronunciation and your listening skills, feel less nervous when you speak to native speakers, and also make sure that they can understand you when you speak. And thirdly, spend deliberate time working on your pronunciation. A lot of the times, language textbooks will focus on grammar and vocabulary, which are really important, but we also need to know how to pronounce our words in order to be understood. So learn to focus less on how the word is spelt and more on how it sounds, especially since the consonants and vowels that appear in your own native language might sound very different in the target language if they exist there. So listen carefully to native speakers and practice, practice, practice. And this is where an app like BoldVoice, who is kindly the sponsor of today's video, can come in handy. If you're trying to improve your English or sound more like a native English speaker, let me introduce you to BoldVoice. I believe that this app can really help you to speak more confidently and clearly in English, whether you're at school, meeting new people, traveling, or even interviewing for jobs. I was excited to work with BoldVoice because I know that many of you are internationals who are trying to learn English, and so I really do believe that BoldVoice is an app that could help you. When I was learning my foreign languages, I found it really difficult to grasp and get better at pronunciation, especially at the early stages of learning my languages. And I know that if I had an app like BoldVoice, it would definitely have helped me improve my pronunciation faster and more accurately. I like BoldVoice because it gives you fun but very professional videos from Hollywood accent coaches where they teach you exactly how to move your mouth to make each sound in English. It also gives you immediate feedback, which tells you which sound you get right and the ones you need to improve. You can do this just for 10 minutes every day and already start seeing improvements in your pronunciation and in your speech. Here's a quick clip of me using the app itself.
I always seem to lose my loose change.
I always seem to lose my loose change. The best part about this is how affordable it is, because a lot of these Hollywood accent coaches can cost up to $200 an hour for an in-person coaching session, but BoldVoice is only $10 a month. You can actually get your first week free to give it a test out and see if it's for you. And in fact, I managed to secure a discount for you guys. And if you sign up and mention my name, Victoria, you get the second month free. You can check out their links in my description below. Now, let's get back to the video. Struggle number 4 is when progress isn't as fast as you assumed or expected it to be. There's really no rushing the process to language learning. No matter what those famous YouTubers who make language challenge videos want you to believe, the path to fluency takes a lot of time. The people who claim to be fluent in 1 to 6 months are either not being entirely honest, have been exposed to the language or language learning before, are immersed in an environment with that language, or have spent a lot of time studying to get to that level. These people are probably spending the same amount of total time studying to get to that level as the next person who's also studying the language. To give you some context, it took me a good 1.5 years to learn Spanish to a conversationally comfortable / fluent level. Even though I was taking Spanish classes every single day, I was having language exchange meetings at least twice a week, and I was exposing myself to Spanish through the content that I consumed, such as music, videos, and podcasts. I also converted my phone language into Spanish, and I went to Mexico for collectively a little over a month to immerse myself in an environment of native Spanish speakers. And even though I was working so hard at a language every single day, it took me a good 1.5 years to get to that level of conversational fluency. And this is because I was truly starting from zero knowledge of the language before. So if you ever encounter this challenge and you ever feel disheartened that you're not progressing fast enough, I really just suggest a simple mindset shift. Start celebrating your smaller successes. Whenever you feel sad, write down a couple of things that you can do now, or a couple of words that you know now that you didn't know just a couple of weeks ago. Remember that when babies learn languages, it takes them a full 12 to 18 months to even start speaking, and so many years beyond that to actually build their vocabulary up to a decent level. So whenever you feel discouraged about your progress, just remember that fact, and also remember that as long as you keep on studying, you will get better. Please have patience in yourself. I feel like I say that in every single video because we live in such a results-oriented, go culture, but it's so important to remember to enjoy the process of learning in and of itself. Struggle number 5 is being consistent over time with your learning. In a previous video, I shared with you that my personal formula for learning languages is having a good language learning system and being consistent, and I still stand by that till today. Unfortunately, being consistent at anything is challenging, language learning included, especially if you are self-studying the language. It's so easy to put language learning on the back burner when you have other responsibilities like work or school or family, but it's always possible to make time for things that matter to you. Making things consistent doesn't have to be so complicated. It can be as simple as just studying for 30 minutes every day, and that is what I would recommend over cramming in 3 hours of study over the weekend. That is much more likely to burn you out. So just do a little bit every single day. And if you find doing 30 minutes at one go still too much, you can just break it down into 10 minutes in the morning, 10 minutes at lunchtime, and then 10 minutes in the evening. You can also try and integrate language learning into your daily life by doing the things that you typically do in your native language in your target language instead. As much as possible, try and make the media and content that you consume into your target language so that you can consume and be immersed in as much of it as possible with minimal effort. Struggle number 4 is hitting an intermediate plateau. A language learning plateau happens when you stop learning as much of the language as quickly as you did when you first started out learning it. When you are a complete beginner, it's easy to learn very quickly because you're starting from ground zero. But when you reach an intermediate level, it takes some effort to break into an advanced and near fluent level of speaking the language or using the language. Instead of being discouraged, just remind yourself that this is a very natural part of learning a language or really learning any skill. Slower progress does not mean no progress at all. In fact, I think the language learning plateau is a vital part of being able to reach fluency because this is the period when you start honing the things that you already know and working on your weaknesses. For instance, I have mentioned multiple times in this video that I regard myself as relatively comfortable in Spanish. However, I know that my weaknesses are reading and writing, and because of this, I know that to break past this plateau and really get super familiar and good at the language, I need to work on these weaknesses. So my suggestion to you is to be really aware of your weaknesses and the parts that you can work on, and also keep researching on how you can become better at your target language. For example, the other day I was clicking around YouTube to find out more about this idea of fluency, and I stumbled across this video from one of my favorite language YouTubers, Luca Lamperiello, where he shared about word constellations.
If I conjure up the word heart, you might have in your head, if you're a native English speaker, dozens of expressions related to the word heart, which is a common word. For example, from the bottom of my heart. This is not for the faint-hearted. At the heart of the matter. Heart of gold. Heart of stone. So as you can see, and this goes for a lot of common and uncommon words, there's always a constellation of elements surrounding that word. And what happens is that native speakers, and you can see it in a 5 or 6-year-old kid, don't know that many words, but they can arrange them like native speakers would, so forming sentences and expressions that are commonly used in a foreign language. That means being fluent in a language.
So word constellations is definitely something that I want to work on. Just because I know the dictionary meaning of one word doesn't mean that I'm very familiar with all the ways that this one word can be used in different phrases to mean different things. And that is something that I really want to improve upon moving forward. And the final struggle is that it takes time and effort to maintain the languages that you have already learned. Language learning is not a one and done thing, it's a long haul game. I started learning Spanish in 2019 and I stopped learning it around mid-2020. And now I've come to realize that when I try to speak to myself in Spanish, I've forgotten a lot of basic words and simple conjugations. And this is for a language that I've already learned to a level of relative fluency, although I use that word very tentatively. So undoubtedly, one of the biggest struggles for language learners is how do you maintain your language after you stop intensively studying it. And this is especially for those people who learn multiple languages. My suggestion for this is something that I've already shared before, which is try as much as possible to integrate these languages into your daily life. Start doing the things that you're doing in your native language in your target languages instead. For example, read the news in Spanish, watch TV shows in Japanese, read books in Mandarin, and the list goes on and on, depending on whatever languages that you're learning. This is what a lot of polyglots do to keep their languages fresh in their head, and it's a little bit troublesome, but you spent so long and so much effort learning a language in the first place, so it's worthwhile trying to do your best to make sure that it stays in your head. Fundamentally, language learning requires sacrifice. Whether it's your time, effort, money, or a little bit of your ego, there will always be challenges that come your way when you are learning a foreign language. However, in spite of these difficulties, I think learning a language is such a beautiful process, and all the results that come out of it make the journey worth the while. I really hope that this video didn't scare you guys off, but instead inspired you to reassess your study plan and start hitting the books again tomorrow. With that, thank you guys so much for watching. Let me know if you want to see any future language learning content, and I'll see you guys again real soon. Bye.